Hello and welcome to Critical Readings, episode 334 for the 4th of August, 2026. I'm Dr. Sean Philip Cooper, and with me today I have Dr. Drew Nathaniel Keene.
Salutations.
And Lane Haygood.
Hello.
Greetings, gentlemen. We are nearing the end of the Ill-Made Night. We'll have one more episode on it next week when we read the concluding chapters, 34 to 45. It's quite a few chapters, but a lot of them are very brief. But this week we're going to deal with the major change in the Arthurian court, which will lead to the quest for the Holy Grail. Now, if you have comments on last week's episode or this week's episode, we'll read them in our next week's episode. That is the episode 336 for the 17th of August. So we're going to move on now directly to the text. Now, last week we talked a bit about might makes right and about Arthur's short-sightedness or the inopportune way in which the Round Table begins to act. And this occurs in starting in chapter 26, where cracks, we might say, develop in the Round Table. And those cracks are occasioned by something that we read in the last book, all the way back in the Queen of Air and Darkness or the Witch in the Wood, whichever you prefer. And those cracks were such that they will now come and open into real serious problems. And they have to do with Morgause. Every time she turns up in the book, it's bad news. There's no time that Morgause turns up in The Once and Future King where anything good has ever come of it. It's always bad. And this is her final appearance. And in many ways, it's the worst yet. Morgause seduces Sir Lamorak. Sir Lamorak is the son of King Pellinore. Remember him? He was the first knight that Arthur fell in love with way back in the woods. That sort of, British Indian, slightly baffled fellow with his helmet on the wrong way. Cartoon character.
Or slightly.
Yes. Right. Well, he inadvertently kills King Lot in combat during a melee. This is because these melees were genuinely dangerous. This sort of thing did actually happen. It was not common. It isn't common in this book either. But it did happen. You would have juists, hastiludes, and grand melees, and people would sometimes get killed.
Imagine getting hit on the head being dangerous for you.
Well, yeah, I know. And being knocked out of your saddle while wearing a whole bunch of armor by a man charging at you on a horse with a spear, You might get hurt. It nearly did for King Henry VIII, right? It almost killed him. And it led to a very severe change in his personality, which didn't go well for the British, unfortunately. In any case, this is what happened. So Pellinore inadvertently kills King Lot. Now, normally, I should point out, when these things did happen in Hastiludes, they were considered an act of God, right? And there was not any personal blame usually assigned. Everyone felt very bad about it. It's not supposed to happen. But it did lead occasionally to feuds. But more importantly, it led to instability and the diminishment of Christian power, which is why the Pope forbade them again and again and again. Popes for centuries forbade Hastiludes. They didn't like tournaments. They didn't want there to be jousts. They didn't think there should be grand melees. They thought that you should send your troops off to fight the Saracens in the Holy Land. That was a good use for them. The problem, of course, is that you couldn't always be fighting the Saracens. There were breaks between the Crusades. And if you weren't sending your fellows off to fight Saracens, then they would fight each other. Or maybe they would fight you if you were the king. And so it made a lot of sense, like Arthur, to have a channel for that desire, that games-mania, as White calls it. So he's actually fairly historically accurate in this regard, right? There is a sort of games-mania that exists, which is a desire for fighting and combat. And the kings of the medieval period knew this and wanted hastiludes and tournaments in order to channel that energy and get it used up in those sorts of things rather than in rebellions. And also, it allowed them to train because You need your knights to be trained, and the best way to train them is to have them practice fighting. And the best way to practice fighting is in tournaments and melees and jousts. So there's actually a lot of controversy about it. The popes don't like it because it leads to people getting killed, and killing Christians, even accidentally, is bad. So they don't want that going on. They don't want people killing each other and starting feuds. So the popes try to stop it. And the popes are
Killing other
ignored.
people over there is great.
Yeah, if you go kill the Saracens to retake the Holy Land, that's a noble and useful thing. But beating each other up at home in a muddy field, less so. I should point out that the popes were by and large ignored on this topic.
Yes.
There's a fine book by Juliet R.V. Barker, I'm looking at it right now, called The Tournament in England 1100 to 1400. It's fantastic. It's a really good book. It's extraordinarily well written. So if you're interested at all in Hasteludes, you should read it. And it goes beyond England, but she's mostly preoccupied with England. And she says that in England, they were just ignored. And the popes would try to put interdicts on the kingdom and stuff. And those were ignored too, because the priests liked the tournaments as well. In any case, they sometimes got out of hand, and that was another reason. They'd get rowdy and turn into riots. You'd have a Hastelude, and everyone would turn out, and then they'd riot afterwards like football hooligans, and they'd burn the town down. So these things did occur. All right.
Proud English tradition.
Indeed, right? It continues to this day. So instead of the Hasteludes, now we have the football, and then there's a riot afterwards. So you can see why people wanted it to stop. Well, Pellinor is an example of that. He's a picture taken straight out of history. These things did happen. Pellinor kills King Lot. Inadvertently, accidentally, there is no animosity between them. In fact, we've seen Pellinor being treated very nicely by Morgause and the Orkneys when he was stranded there along with Palamedes. Remember the questing beast? And they all left on good terms. So you wouldn't think anything bad would happen, but then it does. The Orkneys, however, do not subscribe to this attitude about acts of God in the tournament arena. That's not how they view things. To kill King Lot, even accidentally, is the creation or the perpetuance of a blood feud, and it therefore demands revenge. The only way to make up the balance, as it were, would be for blood to be shed on the hands of the Pellinor family. And this they do. They kill Lamorak, who is his son, who has nothing to do with them, and in fact has been seduced by their mother, who at this point is of a fairly advanced age. We're told in the text that she's old enough to be a grandmother, so she's probably in her 40s or 50s. And
well, it'd have to be later than that, because we hear at the start of chapter 25 that Guinevere is 40.
Yes, Guenever is 40. So she's, probably 10 or 20 years older. So she's an elderly lady by the standards of the day, and she seduces the young Lamorak. He's probably about 20, I think. I'm not sure if the text gives us his exact age, but he's quite young. This then has to be reported to the court. It's not enough, however, that Lamorak is killed. And in fact, his death isn't the death we hear about first, because he's caught in bed with Morgause. And the first person to die isn't Lamorak. It's Morgause. And she's not killed by Lamorak or by Pellinor or by anyone else that you would think would be associated. She's killed by Agravain. And this is one of those really dark Freudian moments in the text.
Been set up for this all the way back in The Queen of Air and Darkness.
That's quite right.
Agravain has these very strange feelings about his mother.
He has these very strange feelings, and he's exceedingly violent. And it's Agravain who kills the unicorn, remember?
Mm-hmm.
They wanted to bring it to him. And why did he kill it? Well, it's a rival for the affections of his mother.
It laid its head in his mother's lap.
Yeah. Right? He wants the approval of bringing the unicorn, but he doesn't want it to live on and be a rival, right? If the unicorn were to be alive, then she could go visit it. She could, shower affection on it. But it's better that it's dead, right? And that she knows that Agravain killed it. in his mind, in his warped sense of reality. When he discovers Lamorak and his mother in flagrante delicto, he does not kill Lamorak. Lamorak is not killed by Agravain. He allows Lamorak to escape. He kills his mother. Now, we might wonder why, right? Betrayal, some sort of Freudian, dark Freudian, matricide. What's going on here, Lane?
Oedipus.
There's some dark Oedipal urge. That's right. And yet Lamorak goes. Now, it's Gareth who relates all this, because Gareth is one of the two good, like properly good knights. Gaheris is the other. But Gareth has been personally taken under Lancelot's wing. And incidentally, so is Gaheris. But it's Gareth who's really, he's the youngest of them all, right? Other than Mordred. And he comes to the court in disguise, and he's teased by Kay. He gets named Beaumont, right? Pretty hands, because his hands are fair. And eventually he proves himself to the court, and only then do they find out that he's really noble. So he proves himself first.
Lancelot was the only one who was kind to him before they knew.
That's right. Because Lancelot, being the best knight in the world, recognizes good knightly conduct. He doesn't need to know that someone's noble first. And that's one of the I think, truly noble things about Lancelot, is that he recognizes quality in a person regardless of their birth. Only later do they find out that Gareth is noble. Because of course he is, right? You couldn't be a good knight unless you were noble. So Gareth is relating this, and then we find out what happens to Lamorak, because Arthur keeps pushing on this point. What happens to Lamorak? What happened to Lamorak? Arthur is thinking about this young knight, one of the best on the table, third best knight, the young Lamorak. Well, the other Orkney lads tracked him down and surrounded him, and Mordred stabbed him in the back. That's important too. It's not a fair fight. Mordred doesn't duel him. Mordred stabs him from behind. Don't forget it. We're not going to see Mordred now for a while, but don't forget that. Mordred is the last person mentioned in last week's reading. I think we forgot to mention this. The very end of chapter 25 reads the following. The Saxons and Normans of Arthur's accession had begun to think of themselves as Englishmen. So he'd finally completed the job of unity, right? The Round Table has brought unity. It's nationalism. And this is anachronistic, but it's important, right? There's a unity. No wonder that the young, ambitious knights of Europe flocked to the great court. No wonder that they saw a king when they looked on Arthur, a conqueror when they looked on Lancelot. One of the young men who came to court in those days was Gareth. Another was Mordred. Well, we're given that before this episode about what Mordred does and how Gareth relates it, because they're meant to be seen in contrast to each other. Gareth is loyal. He comes and he reports right away what's happened. And he feels very sorry for what his family has done, and he feels shameful. Mordred, however, is the actor in this drama. He is the protagonist. He feels no shame whatsoever. He is the murderer. And Agravain and Mordred, who are both guilty in this case of homicides, and really awful homicides at that. I mean, what did Lamorak do wrong? Nothing. He's just the son of Pellinor. I mean, what did Morgause do wrong, really? I mean, we might say there's a sort of it's morally questionable to seduce Lamorak after his father killed her husband.
Well, and she's 55 or 60 and he's 20.
Yeah. But I mean, what's the moral valence of that? I mean, it's just in the societal norms of the day, it's questionable. But did she do anything wrong by sleeping? I mean, it's fornication. They're not married, but it's not a murdering offense.
It doesn't justify being murdered in your bed by your son.
By your fat, angry son. Exactly. Right. Now, we should point out that the other Orkney children are furious with Agravain about this. And maybe that's part of why they kill Lamorak. Maybe they are taking out their rage on him. There's also the blood debt to settle. The fact he slept with their mother. So they have
Well, they're portrayed as sort of less civilized and more, how to put this, simple than the courtly manners and morality of Camelot. They're much more primal in this regard.
That's the word exactly. Civilized is the word that Arthur uses.
The narrator puts it in, explicitly racist terms. He says their thinking was still half Gaelic.
Yeah, the blood feud, right? The red mist descends. They're insufficiently civilized. I'm glad that you used that word, Lane, because it's what Arthur is upset about. He's trying to build a civilization, which for him means certain things, right? It means the rule of law, if we use modern terminology. You can't just go get revenge on somebody because there's a blood feud. You have to, there has to be they have to go through the courts, right? You have to have the common law. These are the creations of Henry II, who I'm sure White would describe as fictitious. It was Arthur who comes up with the common law. But that's the idea, right? You have courts, you have law, you have a legal system, and everyone is equal before it. You don't go settle things on your own. No vigilantism, no blood feuds. But that's not Gaelic in White's telling of this story. For him, the blood feud is perfectly Gaelic. Well, what happens in 26 when we start to hear about these things? And we also learn that Lancelot dislikes Mordred instinctively, just as he liked Gareth instinctively. It's Mordred and Gareth again. Lancelot is a really good judge of character for all his failings.
In an intuitive way.
Yeah.
He intuits whether or not people should be trusted.
Which makes him an excellent second in command, right? I mean, you want someone like this around who has such accurate judgment of people. He knows that Gareth is a good man who can be trusted and he should be advanced in the court. And so it proves. And he also knows that Mordred is bad news. And he knows that there's something between Arthur and Mordred. Some connection. And this leads him to moderate himself on the topic of Mordred, which he probably shouldn't do. But he doesn't want to upset his friend. We're told this in 26, so let me see if I can find it. Lancelot looked uncomfortable. He had an instinctive dislike for Mordred and did not like having it. He did not know about Arthur being Mordred's father, for that was a story which had been hushed up in the earliest days before either he or Guinevere came to court, just as Arthur's own birth had been. But he did feel that there was something strange between the young man and the king. He disliked Mordred irrationally, as a dog dislikes a cat, and he felt ashamed of the dislike because it was a confused principle of his to help the younger knights. I wonder why he calls it a confused principle of his to help the younger knights. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Not just a principle, a confused principle. Maybe...
So saying he shouldn't have?
Yeah, maybe... Well, in this case, you definitely shouldn't try to help Mordred. Maybe that's the thing, is that because Lancelot takes it as a universal principle, that's what makes it confused. He doesn't help the deserving knights. He just helps all the younger knights, regardless of their motives. And that's what
or he sees them all as deserving because they are knights.
Exactly. Yes, that's it, right? They're younger, so they need help. But Mordred is not deserving. Neither is Agravain, for that matter. So it's a confused principle. Because it sounds good, right? It sounds like a noble principle, but in fact, it isn't. It's one of the few places where we actually get to see White critique an idea. Normally Normally they're just accepted or rejected, but this one is critiqued. It's a confused principle.
And normally he's very good with absolutes, but here he wants a little
A little
nuance.
nuance, yeah. To maybe this one particular young knight isn't a good one to help.
And I also liked a brief aside at the start of the chapter. We get a little bit of a literary joke where they're talking about the words for arrows vibrating as it's
Thrilling.
hit the target. And Lancelot tells Arthur, "I heard it in a ballad," which is of course referring to a jest of Robin Hood, the Robin
Yes.
Hood there. I like that. That made me laugh when I first
It,
read
it,
it.
it's a really great line, and it's good because it shows you that Lancelot isn't actually intellectual. He couldn't come up with it himself, but he intuits that it's a great line, right? Like he recognizes that he has a good ear.
Yeah.
That's a really fine observation, Lane. I quite like that because it feeds right into the idea of Lancelot's perception. He's especially perceptive.
It's in the next chapter, 27, where we get the transition into the otherworldly quest. We've been concerned with a this worldly project, and Arthur is convinced that they're reaching the limits of what that project can do, and now they need something else. This is a way of trying to grapple with the sense in which the Grail quest feels kind of roped in to Mallory. And so this is an attempt to make it seem somewhat logical. There's a conversation here between the Queen, the King, and Lancelot. The King says, "If something is not done, the whole table will go to ruin. It is not only that feud and open manslaughter have started. There is the bold bawdry as well. Look at the Tristram business with King Mark's wife. People seem to be siding with Tristram. Morals are difficult things to talk about, but what has happened is that we have invented a moral sense which is rotting now, that we can't give it employment. And when moral sense begins to rot, it is worse than when you had none. I suppose that all our endeavors, which are directed to a purely worldly end, as my famous civilization was, contain within themselves the germs of their own corruption. What about sending us to the Pope? I was speaking metaphorically. What I mean is that the ideal of my round table was a temporal ideal. If we are to save it, it must be made into a spiritual one. I forgot about God. Lancelot, said the Queen in a peculiar voice, has never forgotten. But her lover was too interested to take notice of her tone. What do you intend to do? He asked. I thought we could start by trying to achieve something which would be helpful to the spirit, if you see what I mean. We have achieved the bodily things, peace and prosperity. Now we lack work. If we invent another bodily employment, a temporal employment, mere empire building or something like that, we shall be faced by the same problem again, probably worse, as soon as it might be achieved. But why can't we pull our table together by turning its energies to the spirit? You know what I mean by the spirit. If our might was given a channel so that it worked for God instead of for the rights of man, surely that would stop the rot and be worth doing. A crusade! Exclaimed Lancelot. You are going to send us to rescue the Holy Sepulchre. We could try that, said the king. I hadn't exactly thought of it, but it might be a good thing to try. And there's the transition.
Well, that's the thing, right? So, as we've discussed over the past couple weeks now, the channeling of might into right isn't enough. We've had comments on the site discussing this too, right? some of the readers and listeners have said, well, that seems to be a rather naive way. What do you do when you run out of targets? And that's exactly what's happened. They've run out of targets. And this is how Arthur understands what has happened between the Orkney boys, their mother, and Lamorak. I don't know if it's right. And I wonder about this. I mean, I think that Arthur's solution to might makes right is insufficient. Absolutely. I don't know if his assessment of this particular situation is correct. I don't think that the Orkney boys not having enough giants to kill is the cause of Morgause's death and Lamorak's death, is another way of putting it. Like, I think that might have happened anyway, even if there were still giants and quests to do. Arthur says the thing is everyone's rotting at home and they have nothing to do, and then things like this happen and it blows up. I think it would have blown up anyway. Look at the Queen of Air and Darkness if you don't believe me. You think that those boys who are killing unicorns and having queer feelings about their mother, you think, Gawain being totally into St. Turtlebox weird nationalist stories, you think that they were going to just sit idly by while their mother, 60-year-old mother, seduces 20-year-old Lamorak, the son of the man who murdered their father? No way. It was never going to happen. So maybe this is Arthur's way of dealing with what he sees as almost a sort of family squabble. He feels some sort of obligation to them because of his one-time night spent with Morgause, right? And done through magic, unbeknownst to him. Right? She tricked him like Elaine tricked Lancelot. And now he feels obligated, like responsible in some way. And so when something like this happens, is this a coping mechanism? Oh dear. We'll have to have a quest. That's the problem. It's not because Gawain and Mordred and Agravain are bad people. It's because they don't have a good outlet for their energy.
I think he goes beyond the need for an outlet for the energy. And forgive me, I'm going to go with a Hegelian reading here. It almost perfectly mirrors the shift in Hegel from the philosophy of right to the phenomenology of spirit. You go from the temporal right into the spiritual here. And so I think that's Arthur's recognition that you can't just change the temporal things. At some point, you've got to change the hearts and minds too.
I think he's.
Well, it's.
Oh, go ahead.
The way that he's set up the dilemma here pushes certain things out of view that when they're brought back into view change the situation altogether. I mean, this is critical when he says we have achieved the bodily things, peace and prosperity. Now we lack work. So without telling us how, without any kind of material mechanisms for it, prosperity has been achieved ostensibly for everyone. And so they sort of have nothing to do. But I mean, in reality, the world that we're looking at here, whether it's the time in which we might place a historical Arthur or the time of Mallory, or if it's the time of the Plantagenets, we don't really know what time we're in. But in all of those times, we still have serfdom. We still have, vast inequality. We still have, a society in which many people do not have what they need. One bad harvest, one famine, and thousands of people die. So the idea that they could be channeled into something like, I don't know, ways to improve food production or something like that, right? That's not in the picture. It's what are they going to do with their arms, with their prowess? He wants to solve the problem without ever doing away with a class of people who are devoted to the use of arms as their defining characteristic. But what if that's the thing that is the problem to begin with? There's other kind of work besides military work.
I think that's right. And Arthur being a product of, this goes back to the Sword and the Stone, right? He valorizes this kind of way of life. I don't think he can even conceive of it not existing because it's central to the social order in which he lives. It would be like telling a fish, you can have a world without water, where people don't swim. It's just inconceivable. Water is the thing through which we move. Swimming is what we do. It's impossible to imagine it being any other way. So I think Arthur is limited here.
Even his spiritual project is a military
one, exactly.
It's not, if he wants to do a spiritual project, okay, let's turn the whole nation into a monastery. We'll all devote our lives to prayer. But instead, no, we're going to go on crusade. We got to fight somebody.
We can't clothe the naked and feed the hungry. That wouldn't be what God wants.
Right.
But I think that's it. He says we lack work, so he recognizes that it's productive labor, which provides the meaning there. But then he says, we need might to work for God. And instead of being like, well, then we'll turn our might, our strength and arms into labor for the good of the community, it becomes, we got to go find someone else to fight.
I don't think he thinks that you can. I think this is the premise, right? That you can't simply transmute might into something else. You can use it for different things, but you can't turn it into something else. Might can't become mere industry. It can't become philanthropy. It can't become agricultural inventiveness. I mean, might is might. These other things exist and you can try to encourage them, but you can't simply turn might into them. And
he doesn't imagine the possibility of doing away with a class of people whose whole lives are devoted to the use of arms.
Exactly. Yeah. You're going to have might and you have to do something with it. You can't get rid of it. You can't turn it into something else. So what are you going to do? Well, you're going to have to, initially the idea was you needed to channel it into material improvements, right? So you deal with things with bad knights, with giants, things that are causing material problems, like practical problems. But now, because this is a fairy story really, the practical problems have been solved and the kingdom is a utopia. I mean, except for the fact that you've got the Orkney kids killing their mother and her lover. He says this is a problem.
Yes, but that's just because they're Gaelic.
Well,
right?
It's because they're Gaelic and because they're might, and they're not being, there's nothing left to channel them into. So now it's a sort of feedback loop. They're attacking the table. Games-mania, he points out, was a symptom of this in the early days. There's all this jostling for who's got the best jousting averages. So
and notice how he says we don't want to just do empire building. And the solution is crusades. But what are crusades, if not empire building? What did the Plantagenets set up in Palestine? They set up a kingdom.
Well, I think that the reason that Arthur believes in these crusades is he sees it as a reclamation, right? Now, that's not a conceit you have to share, but that's the justification that's being used, right? This is a reclamation, not a conquest. So we'll use them in these noble pursuits. Arthur says, I thought of sending you all to the Pope, which he means metaphorically. Lancelot, of course, takes it literally. We get to go see the Pope. No, and Arthur has to explain to him, no, I didn't mean that. Literally. And where does this lead to? Well, it leads to Lancelot's other love. Maybe his secret subordinated love, one that Guinevere knows because she picks up on it immediately. And her tone changes. Lancelot's never forgotten about God because God is the one thing that stands between her and Lancelot. He feels guilty and shame about his sinful carrying on of this illicit relationship with her. And she would like him not to, because that would be her triumph over God, wouldn't it? Right? If he could love her more than God, wouldn't that be the ultimate triumph? But he doesn't. And for all of Lancelot's failures, and they are many, and his failures as a person, we can at least put this to him. He does love God more than Guinevere, at least deep down in his soul. Doesn't stop him sinning. It should. It doesn't, as it doesn't stop many of us sinning. But he still feels shame.
He loves some idea of God. I mean, it's interesting. He suggested a crusade. the king says we could try that. Might be a good thing to try. And then he gets quite excited and he goes off on a little monologue here. Or we could look for relics, cried his commander, who was quite on fire. If all the knights were looking for a piece of the true cross, they might not even need to fight. I mean, if we were to go on a crusade, we should still be using force. We should be putting the might into a channel against the infidels. But if we really and truly banded the whole table together to search for something which belonged to God himself, why, that would be infinitely worth doing. And although we should try to be busy, there might be no need for fighting at all. If it comes to that, we needn't necessarily look for one thing alone. Why, if all the knights, 150 men, all specialists in questing, like detectives, if all our knights were to turn their energies to the quest for things which belonged to God, we might find hundreds and hundreds of things which would be of huge value. The Round Table might have been positively invented and trained for just that object. We might find some new gospels, even. The whole of Christianity might be helped by what we did. Think of 150 men all trained for the search. It's not too late to try. The true cross was found in 326, and the Holy Shroud was not discovered at Lyre until 1360. We might find the spear with which our Lord was killed.
Indeed.
I was thinking of that.
The
said
Spear of
Arthur.
Destiny, and then, of course, he starts to sing his hymn, and he realizes the quest for the Grail. What if we found the Holy Grail itself? I think it's
I do
telling
think
you.
it's funny that
Is the thing.
we get some temporality here. It's obviously after 1360 at this point.
Well, you say that, but is it? maybe it's not. That's the
I
problem.
mean,
with
surely
this.
they would have referenced the first couple of Crusades if it were 1360
Yeah.
at this point.
So
That's part of White's humor, is we have no idea when we are.
indeed, and the fact that someone mentioned something, it could be in the future. So here's the thing: Lancelot is seized by the zeal for things you can see. It actually reminds me of something that happened that we forgot to mention last week. Do you remember when Lancelot regains his senses in Elaine's cathedral? What the first questions he asks are? Did anyone see me when I was mad? Did they, was I making a fool of myself? He's really concerned about his appearance. He doesn't want. So Drew maintains that Lancelot is a narcissist, and those things do not work to disprove the case, shall we say. He's been running mad for a year and a day, and his first concern is, did people see me? Did I make a fool of myself? He's been completely naked. And now he's hooked on things that are tangible and visible. These aren't matters, except for the mention of the Gospels, which maybe. But the rest of it is all just physical, tangible proofs of the existence of Christ. And we might say, so what theological good, what doctrinal good, what dogmatic good would be done by any of this?
Well, Lancelot's not thinking about that, and White tells us specifically he's not. Lancelot's mind was not made for metaphysics.
Exactly. He keeps talking about all the good that would be done in Christendom.
But it's all about the thing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's all about the thing, right? The
it's games-mania. It's trophies.
He's ultimately a materialist. And that's very strange because he really does have a constant awareness of the presence and vision of God. It's why he feels ashamed about his liaison with Guinevere. And it's why she adopts this tone the moment he starts talking about God. She recognizes that he loves God more than her. It's why, and she's afraid, I think, and justly so, because the reason she has Lancelot is because you can't actually go off and find God. You can't go on a quest and bump into God. Because if Lancelot could do that, He'd do that and he'd leave her behind. And that's her fear, and she's right. But you can't. God doesn't live in a little house somewhere and you have to go find it. So he's safe, He can stay with Guinevere and he won't meet God until he dies. But what if...
And I'm not sure that Lancelot loves God in the way we think of, or certainly not the way Lancelot thinks he loves God.
No, he really
for
loves
him,
God.
God is an object of terror and moral condemnation and might, essentially.
Yeah.
And instead, he's not focusing on the grace and the forgiveness and the love. It's all about the terrible aspects of God.
Well, that's that's why Lancelot can't forgive himself, and it's why he keeps sinning. Right? It's like it's done. He's a broken vessel. There is no forgiveness, and yet, to his great credit, despite this sort of way in which he feels he cannot be redeemed, he continues to love God. He feels he's, completely unworthy and can never be redeemed. And he loves God anyway. So, that I think is meritorious. And
we first learn about Lancelot's love for God, such as it is, in his desire to work a miracle.
Yes.
It's all very showy, He doesn't talk about the miracle in terms of, being... driven by compassion for suffering people. It's, I want to do a miracle for its own sake. And so there is, in the same way that after his madness was over, he was concerned about his appearance. His love for God is also concerned about a certain kind of showiness.
Well,
and I think that he can't go out and look for God himself. But he's figured out that he could search for something which belonged to God himself. And that's now the project.
And maybe that's it. Maybe it's his proof of his piety for himself. If he's allowed to recover the lance of Longinus or something like that, it's proof that God loves him back.
Yes. Well, Guinevere, of course, she's fidgeting. She sits down, she stands up. She sits down, she stands up, because Lancelot's going to go off to knight Galahad. They need someone to knight him. And she knows that it is son by another woman, and White says, but that's not what bothered her. That's not why she's sitting down and standing up. It's that tone in her voice when she said, Lancelot has never forgotten God. She would like to hurl in his teeth the epithet, well, you love God more than me. And Lancelot would say, yes, as I should. And
have you not been to church, woman?
Yeah, well, exactly. And it wouldn't land, so she can't say it. But that's it. It's a source of great frustration for her. Again, I don't.
She hates that as much as she hates the idea that he might love Elaine.
Exactly. I don't like Guinevere. This book is not a book calculated to make you like Guinevere, however.
Or Lancelot.
Or Lancelot, for that
matter. That's the point. If they're so in love, there has to be some sort of psychological similitude between them.
Yes. And she's constantly projecting. She knows that she is betraying her husband. And what she's constantly worried about is that her lover is betraying her. Whether it's with God or Elaine or Galahad or whatever. Anything else besides her as the center of devotion is a betrayal.
Have I mentioned I don't like Guinevere? I mean, Lancelot is narcissistic, but it seems to me that Guinevere is even worse because she wants to be the center of his world and is willing to destroy him if he looks at anyone else. And she has no right to it. She's already married. I'm with Elaine on this. You've got a husband. What do you need with Lancelot?
She wants to be his god.
Yeah, well, that's it, right? So I think that's what I dislike about her so much. Maybe it's this sort of theological revulsion. Lancelot is narcissistic, but at least he still understands that God is the supreme arbiter of the universe. And even if in his sinfulness, he occasionally puts his own, image first, he still comes back to that and he can't escape from it. And it's there inside of him. And he's gnawed by guilt about it because he knows the truth of it and doesn't reject it. Whereas none of that bothers Guinevere at all. She's not remotely interested. Her conscience is dead. It's completely numbed. And what she wants is she wants Lancelot to give up God for her. And I think that's positively satanic in the literal sense. That's what Satan wants, is to replace God with himself. So I really detest her. Now, there are better treatments of Guinevere that are a little bit nicer to her. The Defense of Guinevere, for example, by Reverend Robert Stephen Hawker is decent. But it's not an apology for Guinevere. The title is not like that. But it's about her being defended at a tournament. But it presents her as a less morally awful figure. But that's not what White is interested in doing. Jenny does not come across very well in this book.
Do any of White's women come across very well?
Well,
Yes, exactly.
maybe it was written by
Elaine's
Boers.
probably the best of them.
The rapist, yes.
Yeah, exactly. Elaine, Morgause. There aren't very many, and they don't come across very well. Piggy's all right. Mary's Pellinor, right? She's okay. Soft spot for Piggy.
Now, we should add, I think, that there's a great irony in this, seeing the Grail quest as the solution to the rot, as Arthur has called it, when in fact it's the Grail quest that sets the stage for the whole thing falling apart. And we talked about this way back when we did Mallory for the summer, is that to the extent that Mallory's vision of Arthur's kingdom worked, it worked because his knights were sort of maintaining order. And once the best of the knights are devoted to this completely otherworldly project, that they're no longer involved in maintaining the order of his realm, such that it is, the worst of the knights are still left to cause trouble with no kind of a counterbalance against them. And so the whole thing starts to fall apart.
Well, that's the thing. You send your best. The worst knights will have no interest in this quest.
Right.
So only your best knights are going to go. And Arthur is warning us, because this is in Mallory and in Tennyson. We get this at the end of chapter 25. I am afraid of it, said the king. And this time it was his voice which sounded strange. I thought in the nighttime that perhaps it was aiming too high. If people reach perfection, they vanish, It may mean the end of the table. Supposing somebody were to find God. Which, of course, is Lancelot's dream. He'd love that. Supposing somebody were to find God. And then, of course, Lancelot gets the summons to go find and knight Galahad, of course, because he is going to find God in the form of the Holy Grail. And he is going to vanish. That's what happens. If you attain perfection, you can't be on earth. That's, you're no longer fit for it. You need to go up into heaven. And so that's what happens to Galahad. Now, one of our readers, I think I read this in the comments last week, pointed out that, that ultimately these kinds of quests can't benefit the court, because if you find God like Galahad does, you find the Holy Grail, you're going to be taken away and you won't have any further benefit on the court, which of course is the point. That's the problem. It's what Arthur is afraid of, and it's exactly what happens. It's why in the aftermath of the Grail vision in Mallory, Arthur is very upset that his knights go on the Grail quest. He can't forbid them to go. It's obviously a noble quest ordained by God. So you can't say no. That would be to counter God's judgment. But at the same time, he fears for the effect on his table. And this is why a lot of scholars don't like this portion of Mallory. They say, well, what the heck is the Grail doing in there? It doesn't have anything to do with Mallory's overarching vision, which is about knighthood at some level and chivalry. Why is the Grail in there? Is it Mallory just grabbing his Grail sources, which are in the Lancelot Grail, and cramming them in there? The Grail is the most condensed portion of Mallory. He cuts more of it than he cuts anything else. Massively condensed. And yet it's still huge. So what is he doing? And a lot of scholars say, well, it's just Mallory slavishly including it because he has to. But I think it does provide the foundation for what happens next. And White is clearly of the same mind. He's setting it up. He creates the link, linking it to Arthur's might versus right, but then he follows Mallory and saying, this is the death of a lot of the knights, and he gives us Arthur's foreboding in the form of this brief vision in the nighttime that Arthur has. We said, what happens then when you find it? Danger. Well, what happens is precisely what we get. Over the next several chapters, the knights do go off. Galahad, of course, is knighted, and we get a really great picture of Galahad. It's my favorite because we get him in Mallory, and he's weird and otherworldly, and he doesn't really do a lot of talking except in sort of strangely scripted moments when he says exactly the sort of thing that he should say, if you know what I mean. Right? It's inhuman way of conducting himself. And it makes the other knights dislike him, as we see in the story. So we get this in vignettes, just like we got Lancelot's madness in vignettes. We don't actually see Lancelot. We see other people talking about what they saw Lancelot doing. Well, now we don't get to see the Grail quest. We get to see other people talking about what entailed. One of the first people to come back is Gawain. Now, what we learn from Gawain is that a lot of the knights did not get shriven before they went on the quest. And these knights all fail. You're supposed to go and confess. They didn't make a good confession. And a lot of them did not accept any sort of penance. Can you imagine Gawain accepting a penance? It seems inconceivable to me. He's a man not made for penances of any sort. I doubt he even gives up meat on Fridays. He probably eats twice as much.
He can't imagine giving up meat.
Yeah, like imagine giving up meat.
One of his complaints about Galahad is he's a vegetarian.
He's a vegetarian, right? Like it's unbelievable.
You do not eat the meat. No haggis for you.
That fair lassie, dressed up as a knight. Well, that's what it is, right? What has Sir Galahad been doing wrong? Because Gawain's basically saying, he's not doing it properly. The Chiel's an Englishman. He'd be killed if he crossed the border, Gawain says. He wouldn't make it in Scotland. He couldn't cut it. He's only able to do it because he's down here. The man's a vegetarian and teetotaler. And he makes believe he's a virgin. He makes believe. Like, Gawain can't believe it. No way. There's no way he's a virgin. Going about pretending he's a virgin. And then he points out that he was with Sir Malus. And, are you aware that Sir Malus was severely injured? He told me how yon Galahad behaved. By some cause Malleus had taken to the carle, and asked permissions of the boy to go the one way with him. I cannot fathom why he would be doing such a thing, for the first one that had sought to go with Galahad was Owain. Sir Galahad refused it. Sir Owain wasn't good enough for him. Well, he condescended to let Malleus go, however, and he knighted him to boot. My soul to the devil, to be knighted by a Gomeril of 18. So this is like, all of this is deeply frustrating to Gawain, and you can understand it if you imagine Gawain as sort of like the old traditions of the court, pre-Arthur. Your knighthood has to come from someone who's had experience. It doesn't matter whether they're a good knight, but they have to have had experience. They have to have fought many battles. Think of the rejection of Arthur by those nobles in Mallory when they first see him, that they wouldn't be lectured to by a young beardless boy. It's his age that's the problem.
It's this view of knighthood is very similar to Mallory's own. Mm-hmm. What he didn't like happening to knighthood is that it's turning into this courtly show rather than real experience,
fighting man
battle.
Exactly. And that's Gawain. And I think when you read Le Morte d'Arthur, you get a very positive picture of Gawain for this reason. Much more positive than in a lot of the other traditions where, Gawain is sort of quasi-ambivalent. Now, there's a particularly Welsh strain where Gawain is He's the main character, right? And he's the model of courtliness, and he's the best knight in the court, not Lancelot. And that's where we get Gawain and the Green Knight as part of that tradition. That's why he's the model of courtliness. But this English tradition and this French tradition, that's not the case with Gawain, and we see Gawain is a rougher figure here, very rough in white.
Well, and I think it's interesting that he mistakes Galahad's piety for arrogance.
Oh yes,
because I think that's very revealing about how Gawain thinks that, it's one of those things where people who are oftentimes less than moral assume everyone else is the same way too. And people who are contradicting them in their behavior or their attitudes are just hiding it. They're not being real with themselves. Because if they were real, they would say that they act just like me. They cannot conceive there might be people out there that are actually factually better than them.
He assumes there must be hypocrisy, that it's a holier than thou kind of performance, and he can't think. He applies every nasty thing he can think of to Galahad. I mean, a southern snob, a vegetarian, a teetotaler, the utmost catamite, which it had been my woe to smell the stink of through the world. I mean, he can't come up with nasty enough things to say about him. All of his prejudice comes through.
Well, Gawain. So this is interesting. Like, he's really mad that Galahad won't go with Sir Owen. That's Uwain, if you wish to read it phonetically, but it would be pronounced today Owen. Like Owen Morgan, which is written Eoin, right? Owen. So that's why we pronounce it that way. So Owen goes with Gawain, and it transpires that Gawain kills Sir Owen. And, not maliciously, it's an unfortunate misadventure, we might say today. And Gawain isn't terribly upset by this, and they end up fighting with Galahad. And the result of this, and this is important, is that Galahad gives Gawain such a buffet on the helm that he cleaves through the helm and the mail coif and actually cuts Gawain's head. So he's severely injured, and he has to be brought back to the court. And so they hear all of this, and then, they're like, well, nothing good came of this. Is that what you're saying? You had a really bad adventure. Then you came home. And, the queen says, you certainly seem to have been unlucky. Unlucky, he exclaims. And he's looking down in his empty cup, and then he cheers up. Why does he cheer up? Oh, that's right. I killed King Bagdemagus, so it wasn't a complete loss. All he thinks about is killing people. He's killed one person. He's killed at least two people. So there's a good reason why Gawain can't achieve the Grail. No homicide is going to achieve the Grail. And it's unbelievable. Like, that doesn't even enter into his thinking that maybe you can't achieve the Grail by killing other knights from the table. No.
The king asks him, did he tell you that it was wrong to kill people for any reason, and especially when you're looking for the Grail? My soul to the devil, he did so. He preached that Galahad had I expelled the 7 knights without a slaughter, and mentioned that the Holy Grail was nigh for bloodshed.
And yet, he doesn't accept it. It's like it's just a thing that the hermit said, right? Yeah. And that's what it is in Mallory. Like, the hermit wants to preach to him and his companions, and Gawain's like, I'm not listening to this. I don't have time for this. Let's go. And they ride away. So that's Gawain, right? Just completely impenetrable in a way. The spiritual can't get into him at all. And so the only motivation for the quest for him was like the personal glory of it, right? Just, Well, then we get Lionel, who's Lancelot's cousin. He comes in. And
Where do you think Arthur stands, though, in this conversation? I mean, he's obviously not a Galahad, but he's not a Gawain either. He seems somewhat ambivalent in this exchange.
well, he's like gently. And then what happened? Get him another drink. So I think there's a sort of
Coming in for
practical.
information.
Yeah, there's a like. He can't leave. He can't go. He'd like to know. And he realizes that the best way to do it with Gawain is not to get his dander up because, Gawain's kind of a firebrand. It's best just to encourage him, let him say his piece. They gently correct him at points, as you're right to point out. And he tells Gawain, go think about it. Just please think about it. Gawain's incapable of thought. He's not going to be able to think about it. He'll ruminate on it. And he'll fulminate.
He'll stew on it.
Yeah, it's stew,
Yes.
right? Yeah, exactly. But he can't. There's no way to critically evaluate his own role. It's just all the bad things that were done to him. What can I do to get revenge? That's what he's going to do.
Here's one of the things the king says that's somewhat, I think perhaps he's trying to to keep from upsetting Gawain. He says he has growing pains, perhaps. I don't think we ought to judge him unkindly for little faults of social intercourse. It's rather a generous way of interpreting what Gawain has been saying.
Indeed. Well, we get a better person in Lionel, because Lionel's a pretty decent knight, and he's a good man. And he comes back and reports on what happened to Bors. And remember, Bors is described as a misogynist. One of our in a reader comment last week, someone was cross about this. Where does it come from? I don't think it's really part of the tradition, but Bors does not like Guinevere. That is absolutely part of the tradition. He's suspicious of her. He's aware that she's got some sort of dalliance with Lancelot, and he doesn't like it. But he doesn't confront her. He just doesn't want anything to do with her. And that's what makes his... Eventually, Guinevere runs out of allies at court, and she gets accused in the episode of The Poisoned Apple. She gets accused of being a murderess, and no one will champion her. And Lancelot's not around. So what then? Finally, she goes crying, literally crying to Bors. And he says, fine. Nobody else will champion the queen. Fine. And so Bors is willing to do it. It transpires he doesn't have to in the end. Lancelot turns up. But, I think maybe that's where White gets it from, is just his dislike of Guinevere. And he generalizes it and makes it a bigger picture. Bors is a misogynist. And it actually saves him. We find out that Bors has had one sexual encounter in this chapter. Lionel relates this.
Lionel can find it hard to believe.
Yeah. Well, I wonder if this is part of White's characterization of him, right? Now that's part of the tradition that Bors has only ever slept with a woman once. And maybe it was like a bad experience, and that's what makes Bors hate women, right? Maybe it's all part of this picture that White has created for a fuller characterization of Bors.
Here's the exchange, which is quite amusing. Has Bors been going in for morals? Bors always did, said Lionel. Curse him. Morals seem to run in my family. Lancelot is bad enough to begin with, but Bors beats him to a frazzle. Did you know that Bors has only once committed the sexual act? Really? Yes, really. And so far as this quest for the Holy Grail is concerned, he seems to have been doing a sort of advanced course in Catholic dogma.
Well, it turns out that's exactly what you need to do. Because Bors, as Lionel points out at the end, if anyone's going to find the Grail, Bors will find the Grail if anybody does find it. That's the end of my story. Now, but there's a lot of death and misery along the way in this story. A lot of bad things happen to Bors. And a lot of people get hurt, although Bors doesn't do the hurting. And this is what Lionel says. It's all very well for Bors, he said complainingly. But what about the hermit? What about Sir Colgrevance? Why didn't God save them? Dogmas are difficult things, said Arthur. Guinevere said, we don't know what their past history was. The killing didn't do any harm to their souls. Perhaps it even helped their souls to die like that. Perhaps God gave them this good death because it was the best thing for them. I think it's one of the most perceptive things that Guinevere says in the entire book. It's one of the few times she actually seems to grasp the bigness of God, rather than just as a rival for Lancelot's affections. Like maybe the author of the universe understands things we don't understand. And she has a little glimpse of it here. It's nice of White to give that to her. One time.
She has several moments of perception where she seems to be seeing things more clearly than other people. I mean, she has that moment with Lancelot too, although she can't stay with it. She's not able to be consistent about it, but she tells him, the best thing I can do for you is to send you off to Elaine.
How much of that is White's characterization slipping in moments where he really wants to make a point?
Yeah.
And it can't authentically come from the voice of the character, so he just drops the fourth wall a little bit there.
I think that's a fair point. Well, we get Aglavale next, and Aglavale comes, and this is where we get to have a little moment at the end of the Orkney faction, because the Orkney faction are a main source of problems for Aglavale. And at the end of this, he expresses a desire to come to some sort of détente with them. And that makes Arthur very happy. So, setting aside the episode itself, I think this is a place where we can see that Arthur's ideas, maybe this is White signaling that they are working at some level. It will, like the quest for the Grail will eventually destroy his table, unfortunately. But here you do see, like, it's not completely a busted flush, right? There is some success. Look, like Aglavale's making it up with the Orkney faction. Maybe there's some element of truth and correctness about what's going on here. Maybe Arthur isn't completely wrong in sending everyone off. Well, then comes the end of the quest, and that is in chapter 32. And Lancelot talks a bit about Galahad, to say the least, right? He is inhuman, he says. This is the word I've always used to describe Galahad myself. He's inhuman. Because he is inhuman. He doesn't fail. He doesn't make bad choices. When knights are in trouble, this is what gets him into trouble with Gawain. Instead of helping them, he helped the maiden, because his thinking is, well, the knight has not lived a pure life, and the maiden is a maiden. Therefore, the maiden is more deserving of my assistance, if you're forced into that sort of decision. And Gawain's thinking is, what about Band of Brothers? What about the battle? What about this battlefield brotherhood? What about your friends? And Galahad thinks purely in moral terms and in abstract. He's in abstractions, right? And people aren't abstractions. So Galahad being an abstraction is inhuman.
There's interesting observation here about why they were able to succeed, the three of them, Galahad, Bors, Percival. We only know that the homicide and those who didn't confess were turned back. This is Lancelot speaking. And you say that Galahad, Bors, and Percival were allowed. I am told that Galahad and Percival were virgins, and Bors, although he was not quite a virgin at one time, turned out to be a first-class theologian. I suppose Bors passed for his dogma, and Percival for his innocence. I know hardly anything about Galahad except that everybody dislikes him. Dislikes him? They complain about his being inhuman. Lancelot considered his cup. "He is inhuman," he said at last. "But why should he be human? Are angels supposed to be human?" "I don't quite follow. Do you think that if the Archangel Michael were to come here this minute, he would say, 'What charming weather we are having today. Won't you have a glass of whiskey?' I suppose not. Arthur, you mustn't feel that I am rude when I say this. You must remember that I have been away in strange and desert places, sometimes quite alone, sometimes in a boat with nobody but God and the whistling sea. Do you know, since I have been back with people, I have felt I was going mad? Not from the sea, but from the people. All my gains are slipping away with the people round me. A lot of things which you and Jenny say even seem to me needless, strange noises, empty. You know what I mean? How are you? Do sit down. What nice weather we're having. What does it matter? People talk far too much. Where I have been, where Galahad is, it is a waste of time to have manners. Manners are only needed between people to keep their empty affairs in working order. Manners maketh man, you know, not God. So you can understand how Galahad may have seemed inhuman, mannerless, and so on, to the people who were buzzing and clacking about him. He was far away in his spirit, living on desert islands, in silence with eternity.
Well,
Uncommonly perceptive for Lancelot.
well, he says you had
It's
a
an
lot of time with
interesting
him.
view of the pinnacle of Christian religion, though. It's one in which um, people are in the way. There's not one of in which love for people is seen, but actual annoyance with the presence of other people.
Well, I don't think Galahad's annoyed, but it's beneath him. Like, you know,
Lancelot says when he was in that place, the place where Galahad is, other people are simply strange noises, empty.
yeah. Well,
That's like
I don't
flies.
again, I don't think that's annoyance. I want to be clear about this. I think that Galahad just doesn't pay it any attention at all. It's just background whizzing, and it's so beneath him, right? And this is why so many of the knights think that he's arrogant, because it's beneath him. But it's not beneath him
It's
in a
not
prideful
condescension.
way. It's just unimportant. Because it really is unimportant. Right? It seems important to everybody else because we're so caught up in worldly affairs. But as Lancelot, I think, is correctly pointing out here, it actually is unimportant. It's not what God is interested in. And therefore, it's not what Galahad's interested in. I think this makes him absolutely awful as a character in a book, right? Because, and it's why you never really see him doing anything. You hear other people's versions of it because at least they put a spin on it. That's human. And what would a human encounter with an angel look like is what we have here. And I think that's quite right. But if it were just a story about Galahad, it would be terribly boring. You know, he doesn't do anything wrong. Everything he makes always makes the right choices.
Yes, but the right choice. I mean, it's a particularly, I think, ugly picture of God, in which the highest that you can achieve, true, pure devotion to God, is one in which other people are beneath notice. I mean, that's
You know, it's
that's pretty dark.
well, that's the tradition. That's what Galahad is. Maybe that's why a lot of people don't like him. I don't like him as a character, and I'm glad he disappears because maybe that will dissuade other people from being like Galahad. Do you want to disappear too? I mean, if you want to disappear, then go ahead, be like Galahad, and then maybe you'll find the Grail and vanish away, and no one will have to put up with you anymore. But you know, for Galahad, that's not a problem. That's the that's the satisfaction of desire. And he doesn't have to be like us. In fact, it's probably best that he isn't. Well, eventually, even Arthur and Guinevere get fed up hearing about how great Galahad is. And Lancelot does point out, he says he's a
certainly
perfectly
Guinevere.
lovely person. They were in a boat together for a long time, remember, and they had a chance to talk. And Lancelot said, he actually is a perfectly lovely person. But
notice White's not able to depict any of that for us because I don't think White knows what to do with it.
Yeah, I mean,
what would they talk about?
Exactly. What would it look like, right? But I mean, Lancelot's his father, right? What's interesting to me is not the stuff that's taken from Mallory here, which is, the story about Galahad and the boat, and they all go to see the Grail, and Galahad disappears along with Percival, and Percival and Bors get to see it. And Galahad can't get in the door. He's blown backwards and knocked down by a blast of fiery air, which really gets the goat, I suspect, of Arthur and Guinevere, who are just sick to death of hearing about Galahad at this point. But all of that is in Mallory. What's interesting to me is this bit in chapter 25, and I think that's where we'll end this week. It's when Lancelot is talking about being shriven. Sorry, did I say 25? I meant 32. And this is what happens. All the knights, said Arthur, who got to the Grail had the sense to be confessed first. I had always made bad confessions before that. I have lived nearly all my life in mortal sin, but this time I confessed everything. Everything? Asked the queen. Everything. You see, Arthur, I have had a sin on my conscience all my life, which I thought I could not tell to people because there is no need to tell it to us, said the queen. If it hurts you, after all, we are not your confessors. It was enough to tell it to the priest. Leave her in peace, agreed the king. At any rate, she bore you a fine son who seems to have achieved the Grail. He was alluding to Elaine. Lancelot looked with sudden misery from one to the other and clenched his fists. All three stopped breathing. I confessed then, he said eventually, and they breathed again, but his voice was leaden. I was given a penance. He paused, still doubtful, half recognizing the moment as a crossroad of his life. Now was the time, they all knew, if there ever was to be a time, when he ought to have had it out with his friend and king. Yet Guinevere was thwarting him. It was her secret, too. The willful misunderstanding of Arthur, right? There's this sin I've had. And Arthur says, well, she bore you a fine son. No need to bring her into it. Arthur knows exactly what he's talking about.
And we know that Arthur knows because of this. All three.
Yep.
This is the moment. This is it. This is the chance to avert the fall of Camelot, really. Right here. It could be resolved. It wouldn't be pretty or easy because long-standing and grave sin, the resolution of it isn't ever going to be pretty and easy. But it would be prettier and easier than what comes later from not dealing with it now.
Would it really be so uneasy, though? Because it seems like they all know, and no one is really put out personally by it. It would only be for keeping up appearances that Arthur would have to, put Guinevere aside or condemn it. He's known about this the entire time. It's not really bugging him. Why can't he just come out and say, Lancelot, I know, you're my friend, she's my wife, I love you both, I'm happy you're happy, this isn't great, but,
it is what it is.
It's not worth breaking up our happy little family.
But there are legal consequences, right, that have to be dealt with because other people know. And that's what will be the problem later on, is that Mordred is going to be able to put it before him because it's still going on and make him act. And so what he would have to do is I think he'd have to send Guinevere to a nunnery, where she ends up anyway. And Lancelot would have to leave the court, which he does anyway. But that outcome comes after a civil war that destroys the Round Table. You could do it now without the Civil War, right?
Yes, that's my point.
Same outcome, but avoid the Civil War part, right?
And this is what I don't understand, from the legal perspective of it, is that, Mordred lays out the legal challenge, But it's Arthur's right to waive that challenge, to say, I am the aggrieved party here, and I am not going to seek vengeance either personally or through the law.
And it's the right of, even within this legal framework, which is an artificial construct that Arthur's built himself. He has the right to pardon anyone, so he could
Yes.
pardon them both.
Well, I think Arthur's objection what would be and is that would be seen as a misuse of his pardon authority, right? Because they're his friends, and it wouldn't be seen as he intends it, as an act to stabilize the realm. And because it's
Why does
treason,
anybody else need to know?
well,
The
everybody
pardon
does
could
know.
be-
That's the problem. Everybody does know.
And I think it's there is a way in which Arthur could contextualize it as this is the ultimate act of being a magnanimous sovereign. This is me doing an ultimate act of forgiveness and framing it as an act of strength rather than one of weakness. And I think that's what everyone is missing here, and it's part of the tragedy of it. I get its narrative function, but there is a way out of this where he doesn't have to look weak or violate the codes and the law here. There is a way out of it for him. He's not going to take it because that would make a very boring story, but it is there.
There is
He's in a prison of his own making.
Yes.
There is an article called "The English Law of Treason" in Mallory's Le Morte d'Arthur. It was published in 2010 in Arthuriana. It's by Ryan Muckerhide, if you're interested, and it goes into some considerable detail about the nature of treason as it's understood in English law and to what degree it's prosecuted here. And there's several other, like this is the Mallory's version of events comes up in legal journals as well. You'll often find lawyers with a literary bent taking up this particular case and using it to examine 15th century treason law in England.
What a wretched group of people, lawyers with literary sense.
I might know one or two.
Yes,
Right.
Henry VIII made a very liberal use of treason law
He's
with respect to his wives.
That's one way of putting it. Yes, he certainly did. He knew the worth of it. Well, there we are, listeners. That is going to conclude. The Holy Grail is found. Galahad disappears. I think it's interesting at the end, that once Lancelot is back in front of Arthur and Guinevere, they're just affronted that anyone else might be the best knight in the world. And Lancelot is properly humble at this point. He says, look, actually, I wasn't fit to see the Grail. And I'm not the best knight in the world. Galahad is. And it's quite right and just what happened to me. And I wonder if part of this is, Arthur loves his friend and holds him in very high esteem. And Guinevere just can't abide the idea that her love interest is anything less than the best. And I wonder if this is what clouds both of them. Whereas here's the answer to your charge of narcissism, Drew. It's in this chapter, these two chapters, 32 and 33.
He's aware, the exchange here is, he's beaten, and Guinevere can't understand why, on the terms that have been described, why would he have been beaten? "This is heresy," exclaimed the queen, who was a good theologian, like most women. "If you were clean confessed and had done penance and been absolved—" "I had done penance for one sin, but I had forgotten about another one. In the night I had a new dream, and an old man who came to me and said, 'Ah, Lancelot, of evil faith and poor belief, why is thy will turned so lightly toward thy deadly sin? Jenny, I have all my life been in another sin, the worst of all. It was pride that made me try to be the best knight in the world. Pride made me show off and help the weaker party of the tournament. You could call it vainglory. Just because I had confessed about the woman, That did not make me into a good man. So you were beaten. Yes, I was beaten.
I think that's really insightful from Lancelot. Just because I confessed did not make me into a good person. It
And what
doesn't
sort
cure
of
the
heals
inclination to
Lancelot of
sin.
his narcissistic delusions is, of course, the Grail. Once he gets there and achieves the end of his quest, that's what helps him shed the, as he said, the pride, the vainglory that has been blinding him this entire time.
But then, it makes I hate her so much. Then this.
Well, and
Guinevere
that's it.
complained,
That
"If you were in a state of grace, I can't understand why you should have been left." "It is difficult," said Lancelot. He opened his hands and looked between them on the table. "Perhaps my intentions were bad," he said at length. "Perhaps inside myself, unconsciously, you could say, I had not a proper purpose of amendment." The queen was subtly radiant as she listened. "Oh, I want to throw the book at her. It makes me so angry. I detest her. She's so pleased that he's sinful for her. Oh, it makes me mad. She's such an awful person. Oh. Well, there we go. That's it. I can't deal with her anymore this week. Put her away. Close the book." Subtly radiant as she listened. All right. Well, there we are, listeners. Am I wrong about Guinevere? Has she been maligned? Or does she really belong in a nunnery? Let us know in the comments. We'll read them next week in our next episode. Well, thank you to all those who have listened and who support us on Patreon. You can do so as well by heading to criticalreadings.com and clicking Become a Patron. We'll invite you to our patron-only Discord channel where you can listen to the podcast as soon as it's edited, or even listen to it live whilst it's being recorded, or watch it if you prefer. We also have message forums and chat rooms, and it's where our supporters can vote on our listener choice episodes, and one is coming up. It will be the first episode after we're done with this summer series. So we're going to be having a vote there very soon. All right. That's it for us this week. I must now thank my co-panelists. They were Dr. Drew Nathaniel Keene.
It's been a pleasure.
And Lane Haygood.
Goodbye, as always.
That's it for us, and we'll be back next week with the conclusion of the Ill-Made Night. Until then, from all of us here at Critical Readings, Godspeed.